Well, good evening, Glenwood. I hope that your time of fellowship was amazing. I also hope that your experience from lesson 3 showed you some things about what God's trying to reveal to you through His Holy Spirit, giving you some insight into things that He set you free from, and helping you to see that you have everything you need in Him to do the things that He has asked you to do. So, just as a recap, Go and See is a study where we are looking at what God is calling us to do, going and seeing what He has for us based on our personal history, based on our unique design, and then also based on relationships. And right now, we're going to dig even a bit deeper into our personal history, and this is often also referred to as our testimony. And sometimes maybe you've been asked to give your testimony and you think you need to recap your whole life into this one story. And there's obviously a time and place for that. What lesson 4 is going to ask you to do, though, is to just take one small part of your story and use it as a testimony to speak to the truth of who God is. And one of the overarching themes of this lesson is also to consider how some of the hardest parts of your life maybe are the things that God uses most to equip us to see what we're going to do in the future, or just to give us the courage and the strength we need to do the things that He has asked of us right now. So if you have your book with you, you can turn to page 59 and we'll just look at the introduction of today's lesson. I'll give you some time to turn and talk to your neighbor, and then we will dive into what the actual experience is for lesson 4. So lesson 4 is called Communicating a Larger Truth Within Your Story. So it's not so much focusing on your story as it is on the truth that your story could tell someone, or is telling someone, or even yourself, about who God is. And you'll notice when we get to the tool section, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about what it means to write a personal essay. So it might seem like maybe you just dropped into my English class. I promise that it will not be as difficult as maybe it sounds. But a personal essay format helps us to give us some structure to how we can take a small moment in our life and create a really short testimony out of it. Maybe you've heard of the 2-minute witness. This is a way to also do evangelism by having a planned set of small stories about your life ready to share with someone. So as we jump into all of this, it might seem a bit academic. Don't let that scare you. And also it might seem like learning how to write your story isn't something that is holy and sacred. But I am a strong believer in that everything that we do is sacred, and that the separation of secular and sacred activities is something that man has produced as categories. But from God's point of view, from heaven down, our whole life is a living testimony and an opportunity to worship Him. So as you venture through lesson 4, and especially as you get into the writing component, I really want to challenge you to set aside any fears that you have about writing, or fears about writing your story out, and just trust that God will equip you with the words that you need in the way that you need them, and that the structure that I'm giving you is a suggestion to help you kind of put something together in a certain way, but you don't have to do it that way. It's just sometimes when we have these borders, these structures, that can help us kind of narrow down the things that we want to say into a more concise manner. So I want you to turn to page 60 and 61 of your chapter lesson 4. And it is going to kind of preface the Bible tie-in that we're working with today. And it says, in the digging deeper portion of this lesson, you'll be looking at some important lessons we can glean from the story of Joseph, the boy sold into slavery, who would eventually be placed in a position of leadership that would equip him to save the lives of many, including his brothers and sisters. His brothers. There's no story of sisters, but who knows? That sold him into slavery in the first place. And I really want you to think about his story, because it's such an awesome example of how these hard things that we experience in life might just be the things that most lead us to what God's called us to be, that most train us in those things, whether they are something that we chose or whether they are things that happen to us. And that's why we're going to look at Joseph. And so, really in that second paragraph at the bottom of page 60, it says, if we chart Joseph's suffering on a timeline from the time of his great dreams to the time he was put in charge of the land, we would likely see a 30 to 40 year time span. So we see a man who believed in the dreams and visions that God had given him, but he also did not see them come to fruition for almost 30 or 40 years. And in the meantime, however, he continued to be the character and build the character of who God had designed him to be in order to be a great leader. He kept listening to God's voice. He kept having dreams. He kept getting put in places of leadership, even in prison and in slavery. So we're going to look at more at his story later. But what I wanted to do to start off for tonight is for you to, again, look at those. There's some reflection questions on page 60. There's 1, 2, or 3. And this time, I would like you to either turn and talk to one other person, or if you'd rather write, you can turn to the next page. Pages 62 and 63 are a location for you to write. But I want you to think about the questions that are there, and you won't have time to get through all 3, so maybe each of you choose which one that you'd like to answer. And think about, when you look at your own life, are you able to see both the favor and suffering of what you've gone through and God's hands in both? So, you don't have to explain a bunch of details about those events, but explain how you saw God there. Has there been a time in your life when suffering resulted in others and you were able to see God more clearly through that? Or have you felt the Lord's presence in times of suffering and disappointment? So there is a theme here because Joseph is who we're looking at. It doesn't mean stories of your life of abundance and joy and overcoming don't also speak to who God is. We're just going to spend a little time focusing on what it might look like to write your testimony or to create small snippets of your testimony, not just based on the highs of your life, but also the lows and the hard things. So I want you to break for about 5 minutes, get with another person and share an answer to one of those questions. You can choose which one you want to answer, or if you'd rather write out your answer, go ahead and do that. And then I'll come back and we'll walk through the rest of tonight's study and the tool that you're going to be working with as you go into this week.